now it's time for items. This is going to be a big section and hopefully very interesting. We're going to get into refactoring a little bit, dive into editor tools, and dig a lot deeper into data binding. We're going to start with level 1 though, and start by just putting out another item. I'm going to take my yellow key here, drag it out so I've got a yellow key 1, and I think that I'll start with just that, and then we're gonna go save, pick it up, and just verify that nothing is persisting with our items. Always want to do a quick verification, see what's happening, and that we're getting the same state. So I run over here, I grab that key, I go to my game manager and I save and reload, and I come back in without a key. Of course, if I went over here and saved and reloaded, then I would come with a key because I happen to reload right on the key. But of course, and I could go back over here and save again and reload, and the key is over there because the key wasn't actually attached to me. I just happened to save myself in that position. Everything else is saving though. My switches and my coins should still be saving. Save and reload, but just not the items. So we're gonna need to make a change and bind up our inventory to some sort of item data. So let's stop playing and go into our player inventory script. Here's our player inventory. We've got our items list, we have our current item index, and down at the bottom we have that pickup method. And what we're going to want to do is save off any items that we've picked up and then be able to restore them. And since we already use a game data system that stores off all of our data and binds through the game manager, we're of course going to follow that same pattern. So we're going to make our player inventory bind up to our player data. To do that, we're going to need to add the comma here and the interface iBind, again to player data. Then we'll hit Alt-Enter and generate the interface. I'm going to leave this method blank for now. Actually, let's just assign the data. We'll say underscore data equals data, and we'll add a semicolon. That's because we don't have anything in our player data to bind up to. We don't have any player data specific stuff or player inventory specific stuff in our player data. Let's hit Alt-Enter and generate this field real quick, and we can go take a look at that player data. So hit Control and click. Go to our player data, and right here we don't have any inventory or item related data. So let's actually add some right now. We'll add a public list. Oops, that's not how you spell public. Public list of strings, and we'll just call this items and make this a new list. This will be the list of all of the item names that we've picked up, and these will be unique item names. Now we can go back into our player inventory, and we could loop through all of those items and say for each, let's see, var item name in underscore data dot items. And let's just look in the scene. We'll do a game let's say var item game object equals game object dot find, and we'll just try to find it by the item name. This will be our initial version. If we find the object, then we'll just tell our player to pick it up. So say if item game object is not equal to null, and we'll get the component that we need, the item component. So we do item game object dot try get component, give it the type of item, and whoops, that's not it, item. There we go. I hit the autocomplete incorrect there. So we give it our item interface and then out var item. So if the game object is not null and we're able to get an item out of it, this will be true, and then we'll have the item assigned to item. And we'll just say pick up the item. There we go. Now we're going to need to put some data into this data.items list, and we could probably do that right here in our pickup method. So just go right here at the end of it and say if underscore data.items dot contains, and we'll give it our item.name. We don't have access to that yet, but we'll get it in a moment. If it does not contain, so we're going to add a not sign at the beginning, or here, let's just remove that, and I'm just going to add a double equals false. Just make sure that it's very obvious and that there's no missing the not sign. So if it doesn't contain it, then we'll just add it. We'll say underscore data dot items dot add item dot name. Now I can remove these extra braces, and we're going to need to get the name visible. So right now our item is always on a mono behavior, and mono behaviors always have a name property, just like this lowercase name. But since it's not defined in our item interface, we can't access it. So we're going to just go to the item interface, and I'll just type it up here. Public, or not public, just string name, and we need a getter. It has to be that lowercase one though to match the Unity naming setup they've got. All right, now that should work. We've got a bind method, we've got a pickup method, and we've got some data. The last thing we're going to need to do is go to our game manager and call this bind. So we'll add a bind to player inventory, and we're going to bind it to type of player data because that's what it binds to, and we're going to give it our list of our player datas. If I can find it. Oh, not level data. I've got the wrong thing there. Game data dot player datas. Add that semicolon, and then the last thing I need to do is go to our player data and make sure that it is also named, because to bind we need to have the iNamed interface. So I'm going to just copy this right here, paste it right here, and then add our colon and iNamed so we can actually bind it. Now I should be able to do a build. It looks like the build was successful. I'm going to go back to the game manager though and just remove these two extra binding methods that are commented out, the bind coins and bind laser switches. And I'm going to go down here and just remove these as well, just to make sure that we can clear up some of the clutter and keep our stuff easy to read and easy to manage. All right, we should be able to test it out now. All right, here we are. We're back in Unity, and while this is going to work, we do have an error message down below that we're going to need to take a look at. First, though, let's go grab the key, run back over here to the left, save and reload, and look at that. We come back with our key, and our switch is in the right spot. If I go over to level 2, well, my key is gone. It doesn't exist anymore because remember, we're finding the key by doing a GameObject.find, and that GameObject doesn't exist in the scene. If I go back over to level 1 though, I've got my key. So let's take a look at this error, and then we'll dive into how we're going to do that multi-scene persistence. First, we got to take a look at this log right here that says we've got an error in pickup. There's a null reference exception. It's in this pickup method on line 68, and it's being called by player inventory awake on line 24. If we go click on line 24 here, you'll see that this is that part where we grab our blaster that's a child. This is where we're automatically equipping our kind of default items, or the ones that we've pre-attached to the player. So we're going to need to do something a little bit different here. What's actually happening is if we go into our pickup method, we're trying to rebind to an item that's already got bound up, that's already set up and hooked up to our player. So what we're going to do is add in an option to not add data for inventory items that are automatically added. So when we pick an item up, we'll just say whether or not we want it to persist. If we don't persist, we won't add it to the item's data. So here we're going to add an optional bool persist, and we're going to default it to be true for now. So that way I can just pass in false on the one spot where I want to override it. Now, this is an optional parameter. You can always do this and just give it a optional default value. I try to minimize these though, 1 or 2 at most. Usually 1 is good though. So here we'll go down to line 68 and we'll say if persist and the data doesn't contain that name already, or the item list doesn't already contain that item. Now we'll go back to the part where we're calling this pickup, and we'll just pass in false so that we don't persist this item. All right, let's go back into Unity. And here we go. You can see that the error is gone, and I can run over and grab our key. Let's just take a look, blast a little bit more, blast a little bit more, run over here and jump across, and my items should still be gone, but I still have no errors coming into the scene. I don't have that key until I go back into level 1, and now I've got my key. And again, this error, if we go back to the code, I just want to show it one more time. The root cause here is just that it's going through calling pickup, And then down here in the part where it was trying to bind to our data items data hadn't actually been set up because the item hadn't been bound to yet. So that's why it was throwing an error. But we do need to not store this data off, because if we stored it off anyway, so say we like maybe did something to save that and then stored this off later, it would still be invalid because it would be data that we don't want to restore when we bind. Otherwise, we would be calling pickup again when we picked up the item and restoring from the binding. So we want to do one or the other and not both, and removing or fixing the error here it also has the side effect of fixing our binding order so that we don't end up rebinding the item. So let's go back into Unity, make sure that everything was still looking good. I can go back and forth, I can save and I can reload, and then let's stop playing and go commit our changes. So go into Plastic and say basic player inventory binding in same scene, and we'll check that in.